I'm Stacey.
I'm Jenny.
And this is Learning for Life,
a homeschool podcast.
We are two homeschoolers who use different methods, curriculum, and strategies to make it all work.
Our goal is to help parents teach kids how to develop a lifelong love of learning. Welcome back, everyone, to Learning for Life. We are excited that you have returned to listen to us speak. And yeah, we have a great new topic for the day. Stacey, you want to lead us in?
Today, we're going to be focusing on personalized learning public charter schools in California, which some of you may know as homeschool charters. We have a special guest with us today to give us more insight into this charter world. So, if you live in California and are interested in applying to one of these personalized learning public charters, then you're not going to want to miss this. Our guest today is Shauna Anderson, and she has been in the charter homeschool realm for the past 16 years and is a mother to 6 children. She works at a personalized learning public charter school in Northern California and is also a co-founder of Uschool.com.
Welcome to the podcast, Shauna. We're so glad you're here. Would you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Stacey, for having me. I am a mom of 6, and we live in the Sacramento area. I've been working in the homeschool realm for about 16 years and just totally love it. I've been working as a parent, working through a school, and starting a little company on the side. So it's my world.
That's awesome. So yeah, today we are talking specifically about the difference between charter schools and then homeschooling independently. So we're going to start on the topic of charter schools. So what can you tell us about homeschool charters?
Yes, it's pretty amazing. We are in California and we have this incredible option of using charter schools to basically educate our kids at home. We call them personalized learning public charter schools. They are based in a district. A district will sponsor a charter school. And we have the same accountability. Actually, we have more accountability than a regular traditional brick and mortar school.
Right. And I think that's something that people just do not realize about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Definitely.
There's so much accountability. We have to do the same testing. We have basically the same, accountability that a regular school has, and even more so because we have to almost prove ourselves that we are a good option for our families.
Right. So how did you yourself get started in the charter school world?
I grew up in Boston, and then I went to school in Vermont, which is where I met my husband. And I got my teaching credential in Vermont, where I was a high school English teacher. When we got married, we decided to relocate to California, where he's from. And his sister had been working for one of these public charter schools called Visions, which is a big, giant school in the area, in the Sacramento area. They're great. And she told me a little bit about it and said, hey, this is a really good gig, when you have kids, or when you, if you want some flexibility, and also if you want to support the homeschooling and families that educate at home. So I was really intrigued. I applied at Visions, and at the same time, there was a brand new charter school opening up, which was South Sutter Charter School. And I applied there too and got the job at South Sutter. And I also got the job at Visions, but I decided to go with South Sutter because it was new and I could kind of be in on the ground floor. And I'm really glad I made that decision.
So regarding all the information that you have about charters and your background in it, how would you say that these personalized learning public charter schools have changed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. The person that started our charters, his name is Randy Gashler, and the charter school kind of movement in California started around in the early 90s. And back then it was kind of the wild, wild west. There wasn't a lot of charter schools. In fact, I think Randy had the number 12 charter school in the state. They just gave a lot of freedom to these schools to kind of do what they wanted to, within reason, of course. But over time, uh, district schools and, of course, the teachers' unions have seen how charter schools have taken school students from the district schools, and that's, funding as well. So because they serve the families better, in my opinion. And so they have instituted a lot more regulation, a lot more, I like to say it's kind of like death by a thousand cuts, right? They just keep, tightening the reins a bit. And to a certain extent, some of that is important, right? Like
Hmm.
we want to make sure kids are learning and not just out there, not doing anything.
Right.
So we're in a box as a public school, but it's a very, very big box
Right.
with
And
lots of room.
that's definitely something that people should keep in mind with something like a charter school, a personalized learning public charter school is it is a way to homeschool your children, obviously at home, but it is also a public school.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to report to our district about our testing scores, how our kids are performing. And as we all know, test scores are critical for public schools,
Right.
whether we like it or not, right? So that accountability is important. Um, but we have options here in California, which is amazing.
Yeah, and that's something it's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily guess that California has options like this for homeschooling. I mean, it's common in the Midwest. There are some states that have hardly any homeschool regulation. And so I think it's great this homeschool charter type option for people just allows them to have a little bit more flexibility.
Yes, flexibility. And also, we have a lot of families that are just a lot of parents that are deer in the headlights, like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Exactly.
And so, having access to a teacher to be like, this is what a fourth grader should know, or this is how a high school essay looks like and how you would grade it, that's important for a lot of people.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. So I started out homeschooling through this charter school, and I. I mean, I was, like you said, a deer in the headlights, had no idea where to even start. So I think it's
Mhm.
an amazing resource for people who are brand new to homeschooling, who have all these questions, because you do have the ear of a teacher to just like bounce ideas off of or get ideas or inspiration from. So I love that. How, as just from your own personal experience, have you enjoyed that aspect of it, working with new homeschoolers to kind of get through any nerves?
Oh, absolutely. That is like my biggest joy, really, is to help families kind of discover how their kids learn best and
Mm-hmm.
help them, like, hey, your kid can't sit still. This is an amazing curriculum to teach them math. Or your kid is super bright. Did you know you could do X, Y, and Z and they could take college classes? And
Mm-hmm.
so I love opening doors for families, which means opening that many more doors for kids. So I love serving the kids through their families and helping them.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, and everything that we're pouring into the kids is going to be fruitful. I mean, even now, but in time. So I think it's really important work and yeah, just super interesting. I had a question about charters. I only have experience with one charter, but are all homeschool charters the same? Or if they're different, how do they differ from each other?
Yeah, super great question. They are not all the same. They're, of course, sponsored by different districts, which require different things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Some districts are more concerned about test scores, some aren't. Some are giant, some are small. Um, our charter school, which is under the IEM Innovative Education Management umbrella, we have three schools. We are focused mainly on parent choice. So we will allow the maximum choice for parents under the public school law, right? The law that we have to follow. We
Mm-hmm.
try not to put unnecessary requirements on parents to make our jobs easier, but the state does require us to do certain things. So, and then you have some charters that are, you know, they might say, okay, you have some choice in how you can educate your kids, but the choices are A, B, and C. Our choices are like A through Z, then one through infinity, right? So, but sometimes that choice can be paralyzing almost for a lot of families.
Right.
So, really, it's just kind of what you need to help your kids, how much support and how much choice you want or need.
Right. So I guess speaking on that whole subject, do you have any advice for parents as far as like what they should be looking for in a charter if they're kind of shopping around, which like what kind of questions they should ask or what kind of wording on the school's website should they look out for just to make sure it's a good fit? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's a really important thing to definitely do your due diligence when looking at different schools. You want to make sure that a school, especially for high school, is WASC accredited. Another thing you want to look for is if it is maybe you have a student athlete. You might want to consider if your charter school is NCAA, what's the word? NCAA compliant.
Approved?
Yeah,
Okay.
approved, compliant. Yeah.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, because if you're not and you have an athlete that is, planning on a Division I scholarship, you want to make sure you are at a school that has that. Um, what else do you want to look for? There are a lot of uh, accountability things that a charter school like ours, like South Sutter, does for families. We have monthly meetings. We need to collect work samples. We
Mm-hmm.
give attendance. For high school, it can feel very restrictive in some ways, especially if you've been homeschooling for a while. But that accountability is very important for a public school. So, if you're at a school that like you never meet with your teacher or talk to your teacher or have to submit things, yeah, that's great for you. But why would you? It could be very bad for the school if they're not doing certain minimum requirements.
Right.
So there's some great Facebook groups where you could jump in and be like, hey, anyone have experience with these different charters? Moms that are in charter schools are the best people to ask.
Right. I agree with that. What are some, from your experience, what are some programs and resources that charters typically offer to families?
Yes. The reasons that people would choose a charter, I would say the biggest reason really is to be able to use instructional funding.
Mm-hmm.
So, the great thing about our charter school and charter schools like us is we allot a certain percentage of funding that we get from the state to the parents to be able to choose curriculum, classes, anything educational that supports their teaching and learning. So I would say funding is the biggest reason why someone would choose a charter school over homeschooling independently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, for my own family, there's no way I would be able to afford piano lessons for everyone or
Right.
these classes or these field trips, right? So I think that's a very big reason. The other reason, like we talked about, is families that would like that accountability. Like, I want to know my kids performing on grade level,
Mm-hmm.
or I want to have access to some intervention programs if they're behind, or I want to have, maybe you have a special ed student and you will be able to have access to all of the tools and supports that a special ed department offers. So those are some of the biggest reasons why I think people would choose a charter over homeschooling independently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So On the flip side, what, in your opinion, are reasons that someone may not want to enroll in a charter and just homeschool independently?
Yeah, we have this amazing option here in California, like across the country in many states, of what we call it's called a private school affidavit. So if you
Mm-hmm.
decide to homeschool on your own, you fill out basically a very simple form that says you're your own private school. We are Anderson Academy, and we there's very little oversight. You have to, I believe, take attendance
Mm-hmm.
and keep track of who is teaching, who's the principal, aka mom.
Right.
Um, and then you are free to do and learn whatever really your heart's desire, right? Um, that you have no accountability. No one really checks up on you and what you're learning. Um, no one, you don't have to follow any standards. You don't really even have to follow any course of study.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the benefits of that are absolute freedom, which is very important to a lot of people. Um, One of the requirements for being in a charter school like ours is students have to complete the state mandated testing. And for many families, they don't believe that standardized testing is a good measurement of their kids' learning or abilities, which a lot of times it isn't. It's really just a great snapshot and a tool,
Right.
right? But some families don't agree with standardized testing. So when you're doing your own private school, you can decide whether whatever you want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I would say the biggest reason people homeschool independently, at least in California, is for that freedom and that just mm, unaccountability in the good way,
Yeah,
right?
it sounds negative, but it's not. It's just the freedom
It's
to
the
do things at their
freedom.
pace. Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, and not be bound by certain standards and grade levels, just supporting student learning and student-led learning even.
So, speaking to choices, so if a family were to go with a charter, are the families able to choose their own things such as method or curriculum that they want to use?
It depends on the charter. I
Mm-hmm.
can speak very well to our charter school, South Sutter, that we will allow families to teach in whatever ways their kids will learn. We support all educational philosophies from classical to Montessori to Waldorf to delayed academics to unschooling. And as a teacher that serves students in our school, I need to know and be familiar with all of those philosophies
Mm-hmm.
so that I can support my families in the best way that they need me to. So we at South Sutter support any ed philosophies as long as you're doing it to fidelity, right? Unschooling is beautiful if you're doing it to fidelity.
Mm-hmm.
When you're not, if you're just not schooling,
Yeah, that's a
that's a
different
different
yeah,
story,
yeah, exactly.
right?
You must have so much information swimming around in your head about all these different method homeschool methods because there are so many out there and they're all so specific that you must just have so much information in your head that's like just bursting to come out.
Well, it's fun. I love it. And I do have a lot of information, but like what you learn about and read about is one thing. And then when you have to serve a family that's actually doing it's a whole different thing. And that's really where you learn a lot, just like a teacher in a classroom, right? You go
Right.
to school and learn how to teach in a classroom, but you don't really learn it until you're doing it,
Right.
right?
And I mean we're speaking about methods right now, but also I mean all the curriculum that you've probably even
Hmm.
perused through or have experience with like helping a family integrate into their homeschool, that also must
Yeah.
be just like taking up all your memory in your head.
Yes, it's mind-boggling, and there seems to be just so much more year after year.
Right. I was going to ask you about this actually because I mean,
Hmm.
there's an explosion of curriculum out there right now, and parents have a really hard time choosing. Even if you're super faithful to a certain homeschool method, there are so many curriculums for every method at this point, I feel like. So I guess I don't know really what my question is here, but I mean, what do you think about that? Is it a good thing or a bad thing that there is this like infinite amount of choice out there?
Yeah, it can get very overwhelming, which especially if you're new, once you start diving in and doing research, it's it's almost like you get paralyzed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, there's so many good things. And so that's why I find it very helpful to have, the captain of your ship as your teacher, right? Like, oh, these three curriculum I've seen work very well with a family just like yours, right? So
Mm-hmm.
choosing from three as opposed to 1,000 is way easier. Um, so that's a benefit. The other thing, it's just sometimes trying to do your own research and figure things out on your own, it's an enormous amount of time, and can be very inefficient when you have to do it by yourself. So you'd rather spend that time teaching your kids, right?
Right.
Instead of spending hours and hours and like finding things and making up your own lessons. And um, so that's another reason. And then the other thing is, like me, and this is, true confessions here, I am a curriculum junkie, and I find something and I'm like, oh, let's do this, kids. And we start it, we do it for a month. And then I find something else. I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Okay, let's put that aside. Let's do this now. Oh, no, no, no. I found this and this. And you're just so excited to try all these things. That can be really detrimental for kids learning, right? I found that I did that a lot with math,
Mm-hmm.
and I listened a lot. My kids would be like, this is boring. So I would try and find something that's exciting, right? And then at the end of the year, I found there was a lot of gaps, right? Because we'd start and stop and start and stop, and we'd miss a lot of important concepts. So I would recommend, if you're using a curriculum, to really kind of just commit to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I need to take my own advice here, but
Well, it's
Yes, that can really be like the hardest part is there are so many great curriculums, and I'm the same in the same boat, Shauna.
mhm.
It's there are so
mhm.
especially helping other families and seeing what other families are using and how much fun it is. You want to just switch and jump around, but yeah, you make such a good point. You just have to kind of pick something and kind of stick with it. And if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, Stacey and I've had this conversation before because we've both used the same math curriculum for all of our kids since the beginning. And we're like, is it possible for us all to like this? Like, it can't possibly be that perfect. Like, it's almost like the grass is almost greener on the other side. Should we just start like researching other math curriculums? But I mean, like you said, there's no time to do that. And also, it'll probably just end up in delays in, getting through the lessons correctly. So it's just like a thing we constantly have to talk ourselves out of as homeschoolers.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
another point to that is, like, I find curriculum that I'm like, oh, I would have loved this as a kid. And I give it to my kids and they're like, this sucks, So you have to find, like, and then the things that they like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like the most boring workbook ever. But they love it and they do it and they do well in it. So
Mm-hmm.
you really have to find what works for your kids as
Right.
opposed to what works for you.
And it's also hard, like you were saying, like sometimes kids are like, oh, this is boring, and they're complaining about it, but it's like, well, you got to do it anyway. There comes that
Yeah.
point where you're kind of like, you got to do it.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I have another question about charters because there's just a lot of misinformation or just I don't know, just a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of
Yeah.
people want to get into charters right now, and it's hard to do
Yeah.
so, and it's kind of muddy. So why do you think personalized learning public charter schools are so hard to get into right now?
Ah, yes, this is very frustrating. So what happened this year with the pandemic, right? There's distance learning. Everyone's distance learning,
Mm-hmm.
and um, many families were like, well, if we're going to be home, we might as well just try and homeschool, right? So we had a wave of people apply to schools like ours. And that was not normal. We usually have, quite a few people applying, but this was an incredibly bizarre year. It still is.
Right.
Um, so we had that here in California, across the world actually, but specifically in California, we have a governor that is not only just doesn't like charter schools, he's kind of openly anti-charter, right? We've had a lot of governors who are like, well, I don't really like charters, but we'll just kind of let them do what they're doing. This governor is very, in my opinion, kind of anti-charter, and that has a lot to do with the support he gets from teachers' unions. So they've made a lot of laws to restrict us, like we talked about in the beginning. But one of the things that they did this year in particular, when the kids went into distance learning at the end of last year, around this time, March 2020, was they held schools harmless for attendance. Attendance is how we as public schools get our funding from the state. So they held schools harmless and said, okay, whatever your attendance for your students is on this date, you'll get this for the rest of the year, regardless of whether your kids are absent or learning. And they did that for our type of school as well. What happened then in the new school year was they said that we're going to hold harmless for these traditional schools, but the other schools like us are not going to get any funding for any new students that we've enrolled. So brick and mortar schools lost a lot of students to charters like ours, and they are continuing to get funding for those students, whereas we absorbed those students and are not getting funding for them. So, and as a public charter school, we have to enroll students if we can, if we have spots. So we can't deny enrollment to anybody. So we took on, well, we think we hired 25 new teachers.
Wow.
We took on 500 students, and the cost to us was in the millions of dollars to support those students and teachers. Hopefully, with the budget coming out in the end of this summer, things will go back to quote unquote normal with funding, where the funding follows the student to whatever school they go to, which is what it should do.
Exactly.
So yeah, this was just another one of those big giant cuts, right? To, like I was saying, death by 1,000 cuts. This was a giant one where they are just penalizing us when really our type of school, our personalized learning public charter schools, we never shut down. Our kids were learning all along.
Right.
We were the ones that, they actually are coming to us, asking us, hey, how do you get your kids to learn at home? So they're coming to us for advice, right? And still penalizing us.
That whole situation was just so heartbreaking, because I remember at the beginning of COVID, there were a lot of people just really struggling with the whole distance learning thing. And we're speaking specifically about California. So if there are any listeners anywhere else, it was probably similar in your situation, but specifically in California, everyone was doing distance learning or remote learning. And parents and kids were struggling so much with it. And they still are, even now. A lot of them are. And I just wanted to I just wanted to tell everyone, hey, you can homeschool through a charter. But then that whole path was kind of cut off. So it was very upsetting to see.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. We had over 1,000 kids wanting to get into our school, and how awesome, it would have been so fantastic to be able to serve all those kids, but we just had to cut off enrollment, which was such a bummer.
Yeah, I know. So speaking of, I kind of just briefly talked about this, and you kind of mentioned something earlier too. Do you happen to know off the top of your head which other places in the United States offer public charter schools?
Not many.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I think there might be one or two states where it's something like ours, but the fact that well, South Sutter gives families like 2,500 to $3,000 a year. Um, there's no place in the country that does that.
Right.
They might give families, a few $100s to spend, but nothing like that exists that I know of. If there is one, I would love to learn about it.
Right.
Um,
And even if it's, I mean, even if like slightly less funding, it doesn't even have to be that full amount, but just let it be an option for people.
yeah.
Would be just really, really nice. And I'm always surprised at, because we talk about charters. Stacey and I pay attention a lot to the homeschool community, kind of on a national level at this point.
hmm
And it's just so interesting that no one really talks about charters except in California. So it would be great if it was a wider spread solution.
Yeah, and what's happening now, I don't know if you're watching what's happening politically, is that there's a very big, exciting movement that is making its way through a lot of state legislatures about having the funding go to students instead of schools.
Hmm.
So, as a family, right, you may say it's $10,000 a student per year that a school would get, right? That $10,000 would be in charge, the family would be in charge of it. So they could decide, well, yes, we want to go to our local public school. Or they could say, no, we'd like to go to this private Waldorf school. Or they might say, no, we want to homeschool and use that money for classes and books and buy it on our own. So, I mean, when you think about how other systems work, it would be amazing if this funding following the students, or being in funding being given to families so that they can decide, right?
Hmm.
And that helps students that live in areas that don't have great public schools,
Right.
um, and in my opinion, really, when you have a lot of competition in anything, the competition makes everyone better.
Right.
The brick and mortar public schools right now have no competition. They have an absolute monopoly. And they have no incentive really for getting better, doing innovative things. The incentive, I mean, they do. Their incentive is right to teach kids, but that teacher that's been there for 30 years and doing the same thing and using the same like overhead projector because there's no incentive for her to learn any technology or right.
Right.
And I'm generalizing and stereotyping, which I shouldn't.
But
But
no, but this is a common thing that we hear about. And I mean, Stacey and I, we recorded another episode, which was basically an introduction to us and who we are and why we homeschool. And we also went into our educational background. And so we, in the 90s, were experiencing these same issues that are still a problem in public schools and were even before we were in public school. So
hmm
I completely agree with you that there is a lack of innovation. And, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing that they're not able to kind of change and grow and improve.
right, there's a lot of bureaucracy
Hmm.
whenever you have, systems run by the government. Um, and that some systems are great, and I'm not knocking it. And public schools are an amazing resource for many
Hmm.
families. And I think they work for a lot of kids. So I'm not knocking public schools. I'm not knocking teachers, but kids learn in so many different ways. And the majority of
Hmm.
kids do not learn best sitting in a classroom for 8 hours. I'm sorry.
Right.
And it's also, definitely not a knock on like the individual teacher is what I find as well. There are so many teachers that teach at a brick and mortar that are trying to be innovative and are trying like their hardest.
Right.
I think kind of what we're talking about is just the upper levels of the, like you mentioned, Shauna, the bureaucracy of everything.
Yeah.
So if you are a teacher and you're working hard, we definitely see you and we know you're out there.
Oh,
Yeah.
these teachers that are doing the distance learning,
Oh, yeah.
good grief.
Yes.
My heart is with them. They are doing amazing with what they have. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but again, like you're in that box, right? You can only do so much within that box. And the other thing about public schools is our world has changed even since the 90s. I remember my, math class in, what was it, fourth grade, Sister Noel saying, "You're never going to have a calculator in your hand, so you better learn your math facts." Well, I would love to wave my phone in her face right now because we have access to the entire world at our fingertips,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mhm.
memorizing the facts um, so that we could pass the test is just not a good use of anyone's time, right? We should be teaching kids to think critically, to collaborate, to solve problems. So I think that that type of education, our education world really has to shift, and it's very ripe for disruption, which this whole pandemic has been a giant blessing because it's shifted what we what we see education as, and many parents are like, "Wow, is that all you're doing in school? Wow, that's that's
Mhm.
depressing." Right? So they're seeing what happens. So I think it's, in a way, it's been a very good thing that this happened and people's eyes have been open.
Yeah, because I think there are some people who have homeschooled even independently, just out of necessity, kind of because distance learning wasn't working, and then they realized, oh, this is great. I can get so much done in such a shorter amount of time than my kids, being in public school all day. So
Right.
I agree with you. I think at first it was probably really hard for a lot of people, and I think
Yeah.
now people are figuring it out. So maybe for the 2021-2022 school year, things will be very smooth.
Yeah, very interesting is we thought we would absorb all of these kids who are like, distance learning. And then once schools opened up, they would just go back, so we expected kind of a mass exodus, right, when schools open. But what we found is many people are staying
Hmm.
and enjoying what they're doing, just like you said. So,
That's amazing and very, very interesting because this is something that Stacey and I have been thinking about a lot is homeschooling still going to be a big thing this upcoming year? And I anticipate that it probably will.
yeah, it's the trend for homeschooling across the United States is trending upwards. But, you know, I think the problems that we still have to face really is making things accessible to people. Like, I'm sure there's a single mom with a bunch of kids that would love to homeschool, but has to work three jobs to support everybody,
Yes.
right? So that accessibility of homeschooling, that's a problem that I interested in solving and working on, and then also the other problem that I trying to work on solving is making it sustainable for families.
Hmm.
Like, I know I've hit a wall and been like, "Hi, you're all going to school," I can't take it anymore. But it's hard.
Right. Well, speaking of accessibility, would you mind telling us just a little bit more about your website, Uschool?
Yeah. So, like I said, these problems are on my heart and on my mind of trying to help families gain access and to opportunities and make things simple and sustainable. What I love about my job at South Sutter is supporting families, encouraging them, helping them, coaching them. So I got involved with a company. It was called Unschool.school. It started before the pandemic. And then we shifted a bit after the pandemic, kind of rebranded a bit. We're now called uschool.com. And what we are is a platform where people can list classes as educators and find classes as parents or as learners, and we want to connect them. We want to make that a simple process for people. And we're also trying to connect these educators and learners with underutilized space in our communities, right? So another problem is finding space to teach a class. You'd love to
Hmm.
teach a class, but I don't have the space for it, right? So, and now there's plenty of office spaces that are sitting unused, right? That
Hmm.
could be used by kids. And then, there's a lot of underutilized brain knowledge in our community, right? My dad, for example, was a computer programmer in his working years, and he's sitting at home now watching TV, but he has this knowledge in his head. He's not an educator, but there's a homeschool kid that would love to learn COBOL out there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So tapping into that, or just like you, Stacey, like you, Jenny, you have this incredible knowledge of teaching kids, right? And you might be able to teach a class on math to a mom that's like, I have no idea what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
moms, or even these moms that have given up their careers so that they can homeschool their children, are now, sitting at home like, what can I do? I have this 18-year gap on my resume, but I have all of this knowledge that I could put to use. So giving people like that a space to find opportunities, make a little money, or give back to their communities. And then also as a company, we really want to provide that support and encouragement that is so crucial to especially new homeschool families. So we offer lots of coaching and just advice and support. So that's another area that we are working on as well.
It sounds really, really interesting. And I didn't know about any of this prior to speaking with you. So I am really excited to go on that website. I think it would be a really great resource for any sort of homeschooler, whether you're experienced or not. So we'll make sure to put a link to uschool.com in the show notes.
That's great. Yeah, it's the letter U, school, one word, .com. So kind of like we came up with, like U-Haul, right? You haul your own stuff. So building your own school is really, or building your own learning really is the best thing for you because everyone's so different. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Well, while we wind down on the subject of public charter schools, what is some advice that you would give to someone who's kind of struggling with the decision whether they should go with a public charter school or homeschool independently?
Yes, this is a question that many families wrestle with, right? If you're brand new, I would really recommend going with a charter school, or if you're coming from a traditional space in education, going with a charter is going to be a great bridge for you if you decide to homeschool independently. You'll have the oversight, the help, the support, the knowledge base that you might not have just yet, and funding, right? That's a big part of it. If you are like us, where you have a gaggle of kids and not a lot of money to do the things that you would love to do, that's a great option. If you are mindful, or if you very concerned about oversight, really want the freedom to do things your own way, then homeschooling independently is really for you. If you're against standardized testing, if you don't want to follow standards, if you don't really care where your kid is performing at and just, wanting him to learn freely, then private school affidavit in California is the best way to go. So funding, freedom, oversight, those are some things to think about.
Yeah, it definitely comes down to funding and then how much freedom. So I like that you broke it down that way. Well, on to the most, exciting part of our podcast. We have a recurring segment called Recommendation of the Week. So, Shauna, do you have a special recommendation of the week for our audience?
Okay, let's see. So one thing that I think a lot of people have explored is Outschool.com. Outschool classes are so fun. They are virtual, but they have amazing classes that are like my son learning about mammals through Pokemon. he had such a great time. So they have these really super fun, often enrichment type classes, but they do have core classes. So if you're thinking about homeschooling independently or with a charter, I know South Sutter pays for Outschool classes, which is awesome. But that is a way to I guess, farm out the classes that you don't want to teach, right?
Right.
So that would be my recommendation.
I love that recommendation actually because something that I think people might be concerned about, especially if they're homeschooling independently, is the price. But from what I've seen on Outschool, it is super affordable to do those classes.
Yeah, very affordable. Great. They have grown so much,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm hoping uschool.com will be the Outschool for in-person opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
But they do an amazing job. Outschool is a great resource for any family. Even if you're in a public brick and mortar school, you can do those classes for fun too.
All right, Shauna. Well, thank you so much for all of this information. You've just been a wealth of knowledge as far as public charter schools go. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
So happy to join you, Jenny and Stacey. I love what you're doing with Kids Learning for Life too. It's awesome. It's such a great resource for families. So thank you.
Thank you again to Shauna Anderson for all that wonderful and very detailed information on how charter schools work and, whether it's the right option for you and your family.
Be sure to check out her website, uschool.com, which we have linked in the show notes below.
See you next time.
See you next time. I think my next one's better.
See you next time. See you next time.
See you next time.